Good morning, everyone. Let us continue the same chapter, resources and development. We have discussed about resources, definition of resources, classification of resources, sustainable development, the different types of abiotic resources, and then the differences between these two resources, exhaustibility, the classification of resources on the basis of exhaustibility, on the basis of ownership. Then we have also discussed about the economic zone or exclusive economic zone and economic zone as well as development of resources, isn't it? That the development of resources is the efficient and optimum utilization of resources that are used by us for our various needs and contribute to the growth of the economy, isn't it? We have discussed about, and the resources are very vital for human survival as well as for maintaining the quality of life, and the utilization of resources in careful and judicious way for future consumption is called resource development. I have discussed these things with you, and I must have discussed with you the concept of sustainable development. That sustainable development takes place on the basis of the development, but that should not damage the environment. That should not hamper or that should not cause any kind of problem or any problems for the present environment. Development has to take place, but that should not take place at the cost of environment. So that is your sustainable development. So far I have discussed with you that development should take place without damaging the environment, and development in the present should not compromise with the needs of future generation, right? And it is important as it saves national budget, fulfills the need of people, conserves natural resources, helps in the coordination between the natural resources and people, and conserves natural resources for future generation. I have discussed with you Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit 1992, right? And the first one that was held in Stockholm in Sweden in 72. Then after 10 years in 82, where Kenya, Nairobi, Kenya, and then again after 10 years in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and then for Johannesburg, South Africa, 2002, and the last one that had taken place in Rio de Janeiro again, but that was called Rio de Janeiro plus 20, because now 19 it's a 20, right? 20 or 2022, so that's why it is called what, Rio plus 20. Also took place in Rio de Janeiro in 2012. Okay. And the Earth Summit, you remember the Earth Summit, I must have discussed with you the Earth Summit, and that is your what, summit here means what, the mount. Here when you relate it with the present topic, it is the agreement kind of, right? Agreement or sometimes summit, right? The summit or meeting and agreement which takes place, but basically you can say meeting. Okay, and as far as this summit in geography is concerned, you can simply say that this is your mountain top. Okay, mountain top or Rio convention. So we can say that the meeting, right? Summit here of course means that meeting, Earth Summit meeting. Okay, now Agenda 21, I have discussed with you the Agenda 21 also, that to achieve this global sustainable development agenda was to combat environmental damage and poverty and diseases, that too communicable diseases, and is the responsibility of all the nations, the member nations, to communicate with each other so that the problems can be easily solved among, if any problem is there among the member countries. Now let us discuss about the resource planning. What is that resource planning? In fact, resource planning is the process in which tasks are allocated to both human and non-human resources, right? And it's a complex process which involves identification, inventory of resources across the regions of the country, and resource planning is the judicious use of resources, and it becomes more important in a country like India. Let me tell you one by one, or you can understand like this, that resource planning is a technique or a skill or proper or judicious utilization of resources. In other words, you can say that it stands for planned utilization. Got it? It stands for planned utilization of natural resources. Okay, then resource planning makes the judicious use of resources possible, right? It reduces their wastage. It keeps the environment free and clean. It takes care of our future needs. Okay, so that is what about the resource planning. But how does it take place? The resource planning consists of basically 3 stages, and it takes place in 3 phases also. You can say that this is preparatory. The number 1 is preparing inventory of resources, discovering resources. Okay, then evaluation in terms of availability of resources for development. How much it is available, what is the what is the quantity, suppose of coal or minerals or any mineral resources, how much is the reserve, how much we can use at present, how much we can keep it for future generation, because this is what non-renewable resources. Got it? So therefore, preparing inventory of resources, then evaluation in terms of what? In terms of availability of resources for the development, right? Planning for exploitation. How to, if you do not have the technology, how will you exploit the resource? So you should have, or the country should have the technology, right? The appropriate technology, right, for exploring, for exploring as well as for extracting the resources, right? Now let me tell you something about these 3. Just now, as I have discussed with you, 3 stages like preparing inventory, number 1, number 2 evaluation, and number 3 that planning for exploitation of resources. Okay, the first stage concerns with the surveying and mapping of the areas and their natural resources. Characteristics and properties of resources are also to be known, measured and noted down. Surveying and mapping, how much it is available, right, where, in which part of the country it is available, that if the different categories, and if we classify it into different categories, which category should we use at first. Okay, then the properties should be known, right, for the development. Then the second stage studies about the resources planning in terms of technology. Just now I told you, in terms of technology and existing and required technology. If it is existing, we can easily exploit, right? And if the resources are found at great depth, and if we do not have that much technology to extract the resources from the depth, so we should have, okay, we should have that type of technology, I mean required technology, and economic viability and economic feasibility, how much it is, how much feasible this particular resource is. So we should focus on these things, and availability of the required technology. Then for the purpose is a major consideration, because if you don't have the technology, or if a country doesn't have any technology, right, for exploiting the resources will remain as it is on the surface of the earth. Right here, just now I have used the word economic viability. So what is that viability? You know, viability refers to the capability of a resource developing and surviving without outside help. Got it? It should be economical from the utility point of view. That's why I have used both the words economic viability and economic feasibility. Right, viability, again telling you, refers to the capability of the resource developing and surviving without any or without outside help. right? So besides these considerations, resource planning examines, you know what, besides these considerations, I can tell you that the resource planning examines the points of view of the orders as well, right? How is it so? Because an action oriented planning is objective. Action oriented planning is the third one, or of the third stage, isn't it? Here the emphasis is on examining the possibility or prospects of use, reuse or recycling of the resources. That's your third stage, right? So third stage requires what? That examining the possibilities or the prospects of use, right, in the future, and whether should it be recycled, should we use it after cycling it. So all these things should be kept in mind. So that was your third stage, and action oriented planning is the objective. Okay, now so far we have discussed about the resource planning. Let me tell you something about conservation of resources. What is conservation of resource? First of all, conservation of resource, do we need to conserve the resource? Yeah, of course. What are the aims and objectives of conservation of resource? Let me tell you. Conservation in brief, we can say that it means the intelligent management of natural resources by man. Okay, and in other words, is a judicious and well planned utilization of natural resources by humans. Got it? That it's a judicious and well planned utilization of natural resources by humans, right? So conservation does not mean that we are not to use the available natural resources. It's not like that. We should use, but what is required, what is needed? That judicious way to utilize, judicious, and the proper planning is required. Okay, so it implies, conservation does not mean that we are not to use the available resources, but it implies that we should use the resources wisely or judiciously, that there is no scarcity and wastage. So we should focus on what, avoiding the wastage as well as scarcity. Why is it so? Because then after we'll have to focus on what? Sustainable development, right? The scarcity, if the resources will not be formed, because that takes millions of years, isn't it? The resource formation takes millions of years, and you know that there are two categories, broad categories, renewable and non-renewable. So you should focus mainly on non-renewable. We should not waste those non-renewable resources. For example, your fossil fuels. So we should be very, very careful, and we should focus on judicious use of this fossil fuel. Okay. Now I have just now told you that what are the aims and objectives of conservation. Yeah, of course there are certain aims and objectives, that the main purpose or objectives of the conservation of resource is to provide the highest sustainable, that is, you can say, maintainable benefit to the present generation or the quality of living for mankind, isn't it? Mankind. And then it also aims at maintaining the potential, remember, potential, or in other words stock, to meet the needs of future generation. Then the emphasis, right, the emphasis is on, or in other words we can say that using resources wisely for the present, and the same thing in saving enough for the future generations, right? And the conservation of resources aims at preventing over exploitation, wastage, okay, and finding alternative materials. Alternative, we'll have to look for alternative sources for meeting daily needs, right? And it is very essential to preserve the resources which may disappear or become extinct, isn't it? And the resources are to be used in such a way that environment does not deteriorate. Okay. So for today, up to here, I'll continue discussing with you conservation of resource. Bye-bye.